For PyRevit, I just wanted to share a couple of tools that are sort of like packaged with the standard tools in PyRevit. Some of them are pretty destructive, so you kind of have to watch for them and make sure to train everybody that's supposed to use them properly. But they sort of like help you if you're an architect on the project, or if you're a BIM manager on the project, BIM specialist with the responsibility of keeping the model clean, to sort of like find things and keep them organized and clean. The first thing that I wanted to show you is when you are working with collaborated models. Let's say if I'm in a 3D view and I make adjustment to this wall, there's a set of tools in here under project panel in PyRevit set of tools that's sort of like under teams that you could find answers to, like, for example, who owns that piece of element very quickly using that tool that's called who did that. So you could figure out who reloaded the keynotes last, and you can figure out who created the selected element. So if I have the selected element in here, and you can say who created the selected element. Now, all this information is sort of like available within the Revit API. So if you have the work sharing model enabled, let's say I'll put it on the owners, if you hover over any of the elements, you get a whole lot of this information. But sort of like those are easier tools to get access to that information very quickly. There's some other ones that are kind of handy in here, like, for example, select elements owned by me in this current view. So I can sort of like very quickly figure out how much of the content of this view I've actually touched and modified. Those are the ones that nobody else can touch because I'm the owner, and unless I synchronize and release the ownership of those elements. So those are sort of like handy tools that you might find useful. We have a couple of tools that are super helpful in keeping your model clean. There's a whole lot of scripts under inspect, under the analysis panel, that are designed to sort of like look into your model and inspect things. Like, for example, this last one is called list family sizes. I've actually ran it before because it takes a while to run, but it basically opens every Revit family that's inside this model and sort of like determines its file size, and sort of like gives you a report of all of these. So you can take a look at the size of these families that are inside your model. So I can see that it's like generic vanity, a unit bathroom that has like 3 megabyte or something like that. Maybe I want to take a look at this and reduce the size of this to affect the size of my model. So that's one of the things that's sort of like, you can take a look at. And there's a whole bunch of other good utilities in here as well. There is another one sort of like close to families that I actually use quite often on projects. It's called a Revit family check, a family quick check. And you can find it under project family. It's called family quick check. And what it does is basically, it's very similar to the family size checker. It opens all the files, all the families that are sort of like inside your Revit model, and makes sure that they actually open without any exceptions. This is a great tool to catch those instances of families that are corrupt in Revit model, and sort of like creates a model that it can't really open, or throws a whole bunch of errors when you're opening it. So this way it goes through all the families that are inside the model. It might take a couple of minutes to finish, but it'll tell you if they are sort of like valid and open with no problems. Sort of like the infamous set of wipe tools in PyRevit are pretty popular for getting your model clean. One of the ones that I wanted to show you is that, like, if I go to any of my floor plans in here, let's see, go to base floor plan, and I want to create an elevation. You all know that if you accidentally delete that elevation, the empty elevation tag will still be there because it assumes that you might want to add elevation views to it later. One of the tools that you could use is this wipe empty elevation tags. So it goes through all your model, all your views in a model, and cleans up those empty elevation tags, and it will give you a report of how many of these elements it has actually deleted. You have sort of like along the same set of lines, you have the wipe arrowhead types. So it will show you all the arrowheads that are inside your model. If you want to clean them up, you can clean them up from here. One of the ones that are sort of like are popular is unused view filters, unused filters, and the unpurgeable viewport types. So a lot of times when you're working on a sheet, like this, and you place, or like this, and you place a viewport in here, you know that you have all this like do not delete or whatever the viewports that end up being duplicating themselves over here. This might have been resolved in the newer version of Revit, but it still exists in the older versions. So you get a lot of like viewport types that cannot delete. This tool, this unpurgeable viewport types, actually makes sure that they're all deleted. So on the next purge, they actually get purged out of the model. You have a wipe data schema. This is quite intrusive. No, use it only for the stuff that you know what you're doing. Like, for example, I can see that the Unify add-in has added data to this Revit model, like project ID, a whole bunch of other stuff. I might want to clean this up if I need to. That's sort of like, only use it when you know what you're doing. There's another tool for wiping the BIM 360 collaboration cache. So as you know, when you're working with a shared model that's hosted on BIM 360, when you open that model on the Revit side, Revit stores this cache in a different location, in a sort of like a standard location that's different from the sort of like the standard method of sharing Revit models over a network, right? This tool helps you clean those caches if you need to delete the cache. So if you click on it, it'll look into the cache folder. It tells you the list of projects that do have a cache, and you can select those projects and wipe the cache and open them. On the next opening of the model, you would create the new cache. Make sure you're synchronized, all that kind of stuff, so you don't have to lose any data. Another one is that's pretty useful, and I use it quite a lot. It's called wipe subcategories. Again, pretty intrusive and destructive. So you'll get a warning that, be sure that you know what you're doing. But a lot of times when you actually bring a lot of families into Revit, into a Revit model, they bring their own subcategories that are assigned to their geometry. And a lot of times they're duplicated and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that I always do is that I make sure when I go to sort of like clean up a model, I open those Revit families that have sort of like duplicated geometry categorization and sort of like make those unified, and then get rid of all the extra ones. So if under casework, I have this base cabinet that's a duplicate and there's another base cabinet, I can actually purge that subcategory from here. So that means that in my view, in my visibility graphics, when I go under casework, I won't see duplicated subcategories listed in here, right? This is great for setting up, just cleaning this up. So setting up visibility graphics on your views a lot easier, and especially in your view templates, they're not duplicated names all over the place. And then so we got tools for selected families, wiping selected families. If you want to select a deleted family or multiple instances of families in your model, you can actually use that tool. Again, it deletes all the instances. And the last one I kind of wanted to, well, the one before last I wanted to show you is that there's a lot of times you have constraints between, I'll lock this and create the constraint, but delete the dimension. Well, actually, hold on. Is it supposed to ask me? Oh, there's already in there. Anyway, so whenever you constrain something, there's a lot of times that in your Revit model, when you're playing around, you move a piece of geometry and you're like, hey, it's affecting other stuff. And you see these other constraints associated with it, and they're kind of hard to find. The newer version of Revit have added this constraint view that you can actually see all these hidden constraints. So that makes it a lot easier. But just to wipe a whole lot of these constraints, you can select a piece of geometry in Revit and say wipe attach constraints, and it would list all the constraints that are assigned to that piece of geometry, and it would delete them. So that would be a good way of sort of like disassociating this piece of geometry from anything else. So you can start setting up your constraints, fresh. And then this master wipe model component with the red icon has a whole lot of wiping tools inside it that are sort of like generally designed around when you are sending your model outside of your company, and you want to make sure that you don't include things that are, creating liability for you and all that kind of stuff. So like removing all the areas, rooms, geometries, materials, unreferenced views, all the views, even like a lot of times I want to send the 3D model out to somebody that's supposed to use that, for 3D printing and stuff like that. They don't need to see all the views. I can delete all the views and remove all of that from the model. This is again quite intrusive and destructive. So be careful what you use this kind of stuff for. The last one that I wanted to show you is this tool that's sort of like very similar to what was talked about the Revit model checker. It's in the intention was sort of like to set up a similar mechanism. So you have this tool that's called pre-flight checks. If you open that, you see that there are a couple of checks sort of like placed inside of it, but there's no mechanism, there's no standardized mechanism to create these checks, right? The way you do it is that if you are a PyRevit developer and you create tools for your company, if you go under your extension, like for example, I'm using PyRevit tools extension here, you can throw a checks directory in here, and it's a series of checked Python scripts or C# scripts in here that are designed and written by you to to sort of like check your models in any way that you want them to be checked. This is actually quite helpful when you want these checks to be making calls or making adjustments to the internal APIs that you have in your company. Sort of like, anything that's sort of like, it gives you full customization over what you want to do, but there's also a lot of work that you have to sort of like do to be able to create all those checks for yourself. You have to collect the elements in your model, make sure that, the names are correct, all that kind of stuff. You have to write those checks yourself. But it gives you the ability to sort of like show those checks in the Revit UI very easily, so you can run them later. Like somebody created this model checker that you can just run the check, and it would sort of like look at your model, and it would list and report a whole bunch of things about, right? And this sort of like you can utilize the PyRevit output window, which is basically sort of like an HTML renderer, so you can have interactive charts and all that kind of stuff in here as well, showing the data that that's sort of like you're looking at in your model. So that's also a quite useful tool if you want to set up very custom checks within your PyRevit toolset. That's pretty much all I had about this, except for this last one that I forgot to mention. There are a couple of handy select tools in here as well. So if when you're working in a Revit model, one of the things that I always tell the people that sort of like I used to work with and they were using PyRevit was that if you use the right tools, life is easier to make sure that the data is consistent across all the different elements that you have in the Revit model, and sort of like validating the data would be a lot easier. So one of the examples would be like, hey, if I get to select the right set of elements, like I'm here, and I want to make an adjustments to all the revision clouds that belong to a revision, but I'm on this sheet, and I know other sheets also have revision clouds related to this revision. You don't have to be active in all the sheets and open all of them to be able to make adjustments. You can just say select all clouds of a specific revision, and I'm going to click the revision. So all of those are selected. A lot of them might be on different sheets. Might not even be on this sheet that I have sort of like active. But you see that there are four at the bottom. You see 4 of these clouds are actually selected. So some of them are on different sheets. And then I can make sure that the comment on all of these says the same thing, right? So it's a very simple thing that you just make sure that you have everything that is correct selected. So when you make the adjustment to the parameter, all of them are consistent and sort of like the same. So that's everything that I had. Japhy, if you want to jump in. And
well, one question that I have about,
so
do you have a Revit icon updater as part of PyRevit? Because I feel like everybody wants your icons, just to be real. Every time you give a presentation, somebody asks about it. So yeah, how you have the 23 and 22 and 21. I thought that you had that available.
So I believe at some point we published it. So it's under PyRevit repo. If you go under, I believe it's extras. And
I'll share the link of this.
Yeah, so I've created a whole bunch of these icons. You can just download these ICOs and assign
them. We go.
There we go. Also an installer that's called Revit Shortcuts. You need to download the advanced installer. That's sort of like the builder for this, but there's a free version. Advanced installer, that's the application that you need to download. There's a free version of this, but then you can open this Revit shortcuts file and generate an MSI installer that installs these shortcuts on your machine. So if I go on all apps, Revit icons or something.
And do you support all like the last 4 versions of Revit?
The only one that I don't have there is 2024, but all of these
are not for the icons. I'm sorry, for PyRevit.
Oh, PyRevit, yeah, PyRevit does support. I just updated the work in progress for 2024 too, but it does support the same PyRevit can run in from 2017 to 2023.
Truly ahead of the game. Well, I won't take any more time of Japhy's and Rhino Inside Revit, but please keep the questions coming on the mural. If we have time, we'll get to all of them.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that when you think of Revit model help and management, you don't really think of Rhino or Rhino Inside, but more and more model health is about your data health, and yeah, being able to validate and know what your data is and be able to manipulate that. So in this quick example, we have a coordination model that has a number of references. And what I'm going to do is, so ideally, you're going to use either Dynamo, PyRevit, Rhino Inside Revit for like your rapid application development. Maybe you don't want to make all your schedules. You don't want to flip in between all this stuff. Eventually, maybe you'll make a PyRevit tool, but maybe you don't know how to code. So this is going to be a quick way to kind of flush these things out. So I'm just going to run over this real quick. This is the Revit query links. So I'm getting all the categories for each one for the pipes. And then I'm making a rule-based filter, just like you would with a filtered element collector in PyRevit. So I could test the type description is a pipe. And in this project, they all happen to equal the pipe, but you could test if there was nulls and then do something. So then that creates a filter of the pipe categories for each individual reference, and unions those filters and gets all the elements. So those are only available in 4 of the documents. And what I'm doing here is gathering all the types. And so in this case, maybe I wanted to put a type comment on all those various types and all these projects. So we end up with these four projects with these odd types. And I'm feeding the element ID and the project name into a data output component. So that way I have another file that has all 4 of those documents open. I get the document IDs that I pulled from the other file, and then organize them into the same order. So I have mechanical, plumbing, fire protection, and then I reference those actual elements and then actually do something, which is in this case is change the parameter to the file name, so that maybe I wanted to make a filter in the coordination file that referenced this parameter and do a quick color. And it's a dynamic live document. So if we search for something else in here, it would you could quickly change all 4 different reference files. Just one instance of manipulating data, being able to check your data. Rhino Inside Revit is available on rhino3d.com. It's just a Grasshopper plugin. You can get it and it gets started. And then there's also a guide that's probably going to give you more about Revit than you've ever wanted to know. So it's a great way to get started in the Revit API, as well as kind of visual scripting and maybe eventually programming. So
that was fantastic. And I feel like as the Dynamo girl, of course, I don't think about Rhino Inside Revit for model management and model checking, but that, I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? We're just data validating at the end of the day, right? And creating reports and looking at it somehow.
exactly.
So that's fantastic.
there's some potential coming with Rhino 8. We have some good tools for shrink wrapping geometry. So I could see in the future being able to identify those bad families when on those gigabyte projects that have a number of mechanical stuff imported, being able to actually change that geometry, create a new family that would be similar but lightweight. So
yeah, right. When you find that manufacturer elevator that's taking up half of your model size, right? You can actually do something about it.
Exactly. And then this is a user-driven project, so it's we're adding stuff weekly. So if anybody has anything they want to see in there or any questions, feel free to reach out either on the forum or email us, and we'll get it in there.
And this link, just like all other links, of course, are up on the mural. So please check that out per usual. And we definitely have some questions. We have a few minutes left before we punt everybody out of the meeting, because we definitely respect your time and appreciate that this is an hour. But I feel like there have been a lot of questions surrounding, the IT perspective around PyRevit. Ehsan, would you talk to a little bit about that? About first off, how we maybe can minimize what tools people get, and then the IT perspective of security and all of those good things.
Yeah. So
this as much as you want to talk about it.
Yeah. So actually, let me quickly share my screen. The thing that I was talking about in the comments that I was making on those questions. The PyRevit repo. This is sort of like a little bit more involved process. But PyRevit repo has the source of everything that's in there, right? All the tools that you're seeing in the Revit UI here, as part of the standard PyRevit tools, are under extensions, PyRevit tools.extension. And sort of like the architecture is designed, the hierarchy is designed that every directory represents a UI element. So this is a tab, and these are the panels. So if I want to remove that wipe tool, I would go in here to project panel, and I'll delete this wipe pull down button, and it will go away from the UI next time you launch Revit, right? The thing is that you kind of want to get to a point that you create an installer for this. And I'll actually comment that I'm going to make a guide on PyRevit Wiki about this. All the installer files are under release. So you could go in here and open this PyRevit admin. Where is it? Where are you? There we go. PyRevit admin.iss. And this is the Inno setup maker file. So it's a very, very tiny free software that you download, and it opens these files, these scripts, just like it's shown on this side here. This is script, and this script tells it where to pull everything from. So it tells it that, hey, go grab all the things that are inside that tools extension. But since you have already modified it, you would build an installer that's modified and sort of like includes the tools that you want it to do. And it takes only a second for this to grab all those tools, generate the installer. These are the files that actually the PyRevit, sort of like the, the continuous improvement, continuous build, the CI/CD system, automatically uses to generate the installers that you can download from here. These installers that you can download, or the installers that are available on the release, they're all generated using the same installer. So if you do clone the PyRevit repo, you can make all the customizations that you want. I'll make a guide about this to make this a little bit easier. And if you generate that .exe, the installer, or .msi on your machine, I'm hoping that there would be less of a security threat prompts and stuff like that from your security software. A lot of the security prompts that you get from these softwares is because every time I generate a new installer for PyRevit, these security applications haven't seen it before. So they generally flag it as something they haven't seen. A lot of times there's really no issues with it. Sometimes people email me about like viruses attached to these installers and stuff like that. These installers are generated on a sort of like a very isolated GitHub runner that doesn't have any viruses or anything on it. Every time sort of like a new installer is being generated, that runner is actually run the first time and it's created the first time. So they're super clean. I've tested if you go under releases and if you test these installers, the URL installers with any of these online security checks, they won't give you anything. But sometimes when you actually install it on your machine and move it around and stuff like that, something gets attached to it because that system might be not as clean as you might think. So these are sort of like the general issues that I've seen and I've heard about. I feel like the customization could be fairly done easily with generating a new installer for yourself.
So even if I wanted to be able to give, everybody at Smith Group 5 of the PyRevit tools, I could easily just parse down that install, move all of the pieces that I don't want to just the pieces that I want, and then push that out.
Yeah, and to make that life easier, if you hold Alt when you're in Revit and click on any of these buttons, like I want to see, let's say the pre-flight checks. Let's say you don't want them to have this. I'm going to Alt click on this. It'll take you to that directory. It'll open Windows Explorer, and it will take you to that directory. So sometimes the name of this bundle might not exactly match the name that you see in the UI. So that makes it very easy to just find those. And I can just delete that one. And the next time I load it, PyRevit flights won't be there. Sometimes, to get the orders right, just if you see these bundle YAML files, take a look at those. They might have that bundle listed to set the order. So you might have to delete it from there too, but they're not super, super important. Generally, PyRevit should be able to understand that that doesn't exist, so it doesn't create it there. Or even if you want to change the sort of like the layout of these, like these three placed inside a stack, these three push buttons, you can just copy them and paste them here and delete your stack. So they wouldn't be three big buttons right beside each other instead of sort of like placed inside a stack. I'll make sure I have a decent guide on this on the PyRevit wiki. And if you want to know more about that, it is on the wiki, pyrevitlabs.io. And sort of like that's the documentation for everything that we have in PyRevit.
And I have that link, of course, in the mural.
Thank you.